guys, we're excited to have everybody here for webinar today, talking through some of the new regulatory changes that are going to impact the way that for the franchise ecosystem is going to be using texting and even calling, emailing. Some of those things are updating by with some of the things that are changing with the FCC. So I want to walk you guys through some of those things today, and glad to have you here. Feel free, there are a couple of things here. If you guys want to chat, make some comments, we'll be talking through some of those items as we get going. I'll present for a little while. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So looking forward to having you guys join us today. So I'm going to get into a couple of things that I think are going to help you guys quite a bit. So let's talk about, give me 1 second. And just got to get back into, there you go. It's a new sharing platform for me, so bear with me. Hopefully you guys are seeing the slides okay. I want to get into what is changing mostly, because a lot of you guys, if you've ever heard me talk about compliance or regulatory things, you know quite a bit about what do you need to do to be compliant for SMS? What do you need to be to compliant with even do not call or opt out for email subscriptions, etc. However, some of those rules are different now, or they're going to be different come January. So I want to talk about ways you can protect your franchise brand. We're going to talk about franchise development, and we're going to talk about unit operations today. So regardless of your approach, you're going to be able to get some guidance, I hope. So there are a number of things that are going to change with regulatory things. And frankly, I'm a little frustrated by this because it's reflective of the disconnect between what our government officials think is important and what's actually good for business. So finding the balance is tough. I'll give them that. But let's talk about this. SMS, texting compliance. It's a big thing. A lot of people I know are afraid of this. And I want to teach you enough today that hopefully you're not afraid of it. If you know the rules and you play by the rules, you can win. So let's talk about TCPA. You guys know, you've heard that term hopefully before. TCPA it's a fairly old regulation that the FCC is kind of revisiting and trying to reinterpret. And that's where a lot of these changes are coming from. I'll talk about today. But it's always required an express mobile opt-in. If you're going to text somebody, you need to have their permission to do it. One scary statistic that we found is our team, we do lead response audits for a lot of our clients and brands and prospects we work with. And we have found, as part of that audit, we check to see how many franchise brands have compliant websites. I'm going to share some actual data with you on that in a little bit. But the key is you have to have a mobile opt-in. Well, we're going to talk about web opt-in. If you guys are doing short codes, I'm not going to dive too much into that today, but for example, a short code is, or even if it's a 10-digit long code, some sort of an opt-in where they don't hit a web form first, fill out a form and say, I give you permission when they submit the form. This is when they text you and say, I'm interested in a job, or hey, I'm interested in franchising. And when they do that, you have to have them opt in again after they text you to say, hey, just to confirm, reply yes to confirm that you want texting. That's a requirement of short code or direct mobile opt-in. When we talk about web opt-in, that's what we're going to focus on mostly today, because most of our clients, most people in the industry, whether you're home service or you're doing any sort of service, elderly care, pet care, whatever, or franchise development, people are usually hitting some sort of a digital property, a web form, Facebook, something like that, where they're opting in to receive your communication. So we're going to talk about the web opt-in. Also, we're going to talk about opt-out requirements. These are the big, how they get into your system and you message them and how they opt out of it. It's all about consumer control. That's the good part about TCPA, right? We've been on the receiving end of lame text messages that we never should have got. So we want to have clear ways to manage that. And you have to systematize your compliance or you're going to be in trouble with this, especially when we talk about a franchise brand that might have 100 locations with 100 operators, 500 users managing the day-to-day operations across the ecosystem. Pretty confident that you're going to have some people that don't follow the rules, even if you train them, right? So you need to have system-wide compliance that's going to help you guys stay on top of this. Let's talk about the 4 keys to SMS compliance. First, your opt-in message has to be visible. If it's not visible, there's one brand I was talking to 2 weeks ago, maybe, and they had a great opt-in statement, but in order to see it, you had to hover over like a little little information bubble next to the submit button. Guess what? It's not conspicuous. It's not visible. That's not going to be compliant. And frankly, it's not compliant today, but it's a great opt-in message. So I advised them, get that opt-in out of that bubble and in between the form and the submit button. And that way it's obvious to any normal human would notice that before they submit the button. That's what you got to think about, is what's an average Joe on an average day going to recognize? They have to have seen your opt-in message. Okay. We also need to have, and this is key, we're going to dive into these a little bit more in depth and give you some examples. I went out and pulled, hopefully nobody on this call, and I didn't believe any brands on except for the one good example. And I knew it'd be a good example, so I grabbed that one. But I want to show you guys some non-compliant websites and lead capture forms so you can compare. But you have to declare or say, you see this all the time, by submitting, you agreed to, right? Like there's a statement that says you're opting in here. And also mention texts and emails and phone calls. Make sure you mention how you're going to contact them. So there's an actual opt-in. If you're like, you opt in for stuff, it's got to be clear that you're going to text and call and email if that's what you're going to do, and you should. Then you also need to talk about messaging rates may apply. That language, that phrase should be on your opt-in. You have to describe the frequency of messaging. It's usually just safe to say messaging type and frequency will vary. And then how to cancel. Reply stop to cancel messaging at any time. And also, you need to have a link to your privacy policy or your terms of service wherever you're describing, how you're collecting their data, storing it, that you're not selling it. I will tell you this: if you guys have some sort of phrase in your privacy policy that says you reserve the right to sell their data to a third party, you will not get approved to use texting. And the texting body, we'll talk about this ghost organization soon, they might also revoke your ability to text. So make sure that you're very careful about that. And there's more. Also, we talked about using an official opt-out. It's in your first message that you send out. You have to say, hi, you have to identify yourself as if you're business texting, right? That's what this is all about. Consumer to consumer texting, these rules don't apply. It's all about business to consumer texting. And I'm going to pause for a minute. A lot of folks that I've talked to say, well, it doesn't matter because Susan is texting my leads from her personal cell phone. If Susan's doing that on behalf of your business, these rules apply, and that puts you in a more dangerous spot, right? Because Susan might do whatever the heck she wants. Even if she's copying and pasting, she might forget to put opt-outs on there because it's too long. Guess what? Now you're not compliant. So make sure you're systematizing, again, how you're texting. Don't have team members using personal phones to send messages B to C, B to B. That's putting you in a difficult situation. But you need to make sure you have an opt-out reminder. So your first text message from any lead, from any source, needs to say, hi, whatever their name is, or something along those lines. This is Dave from Clientele. You have to identify yourself and your business. Thanks for reaching out, and whatever you want to say. And then at the very end, you have to say, if you don't want me to text you anymore, reply stop, or text stop to cancel texting at any time. You need to say that one more time in that first text message out. Also, if you're going to nurture some clients, people that you have a business relationship with a text, and it's been a little while since you've reached out to them, strongly recommend putting that same opt-out message into that first retouch if it's been a while since you've talked to them. If they've been in a steady state of nurturing and communication for months and months and months, you're fine. But it's always wise, if you're going to re-engage and rehash some old leads, put that in there again, because if they don't want to hear from you, you want them to opt out rather than report you and try to go, take you to court. That's again, good best practices to help protect you and your brand. Just talked about that. So let's keep moving. And by the way, you have to have, and this is where you got some challenges if you're not using a compliant system that can automate the opt-out management. But if they reply stop or cancel or wrong number, F off, or something that's obviously they don't want to talk to you, then your system should be able to parse that on the back end and then turn off texting and hold your team accountable to not text anymore. If you're doing this manually, there's a pretty good chance at some point down the road, someone's going to grab that contact in a bulk message and put them in a campaign that's going to text them again. And if it's not automatically blocked by your system, you've just created an issue. The fines are pretty big, right? It's $500 for an accidental and $1,500 for a willful violation of TCPA compliance. So be aware. You've got to protect yourself against that. But again, I don't want to be a doomsdayer. Like, this isn't super scary. Just play by the rules, right? A false start in football is a false start in football. Pitchers can't have pine tar on their visor of their hat or their gloves, right? Like, they're rules for a reason. So just play by the rules and you'll be fine. All right, let's talk about some examples. I want to talk about opt-in forms because this is the moment where a lot of things happen in compliance management, regulatory management. We're talking about opt-ins on your website. Remember the 4 elements. You got to have the by submitting statement. You have to have a link to your privacy policy. You have to have the messaging rates may apply, messaging frequency may vary, and you also want to talk about what kind of communications are how you're going to communicate with them, right? So all those elements need to be here. So look at these are real. I grabbed these this morning off of legit companies. These are big brands, you know. This is the franchise development opt-in. Hopefully the brand's not on here. Okay, good. What do you think? In the comments, give me a note if you think, is this one compliant for opt-in or is this one not compliant? What do you guys think? Any thoughts on that? Well, I don't see a clear opt-in statement. No by submitting, no opt-in at all, right? So this is not a compliant opt-in form, which means they don't have the right to text anybody coming through this form. Think about your own form. I tried to make sure I didn't grab anyone who registered for this event. And again, tried not to. If you see any brands show up, then please forgive. This is a well-known brand in the franchise industry. This is their franchisee or franchise inquiry interest for frandev form. I saw this morning. I was like, no way. So I thought I'd use it as an example. What do you guys think? They got a recaptcha to prevent spam leads coming through. Is it compliant? No. There's no opt-in. There's no by submitting. There's no link to privacy policy. There's nothing. This is a non-compliant form, so they have zero rights to text their people. Come January, they're well, we'll talk about that in a minute. Some of the other regulations might say you can't call them now, right? How about this one? I used a brand cheat code, right? You know this is going to be a good one. But look at the actual opt-in statement. It is conspicuous. It is placed between the form and the submit button so that any consumer has to see it before they can submit that. They've chosen to put a checkbox, right? You can make that required, so they have to check it before they submit the form. A lot of people, this is debated. If you have a legal counsel that's very stiff about they're very rigid, they might say put a checkbox, but it's not required technically. The submit, but if it's an explicit opt-in like this, that's good enough without the checkbox. But you can have a checkbox too if you want. Just make it required so they don't submit the form without submitting the opt-in. That's the thing you got to be careful of. If they don't submit the opt-in because they didn't check that box, you don't have permission to text them, even though you displayed the opt-in. Does that make sense? So be careful with that. But this is a compliant opt-in statement. So this is the nature of what you need to have. This isn't very verbose. It's not too long. But I can also say authority brands, I know they spent a lot of time making sure they were using best practices when they put this together, which is why I thought I'd give them a kind of the gold star example to show you guys what was a viable opt-in statement. So again, opt-in compliance is kind of the apex. It's the pivotal moment where you guys start to manage your true compliance. As an organization, you de-risk the organization when you do this. Now, let's talk about the next phase. So if you are going to register an entity, or you want to text a business or from a business to a consumer or to anybody else, there's a new registration process. You've all been through this in the last 18 months. If you're adding new units in franchising, every single unit you add has to register, or there's a way. We were part of the group that petitioned to get this changed with this regulatory body, and they actually said yes. Not going to lie, I was a little surprised when we got a yes. But you can also register your brand, and then all of your units operate under that brand. And then they don't have to go through their own private registration. There's a lot of advantages to that. We'll talk about that when we talk about trust scores and things later. But let's talk about what that registration process requires now. So if you're a new entity, you're registering one of your brands, you're an FSO, you want to pull in your other 5 brands, you can register your FSO brand, and then all the brands you work with underneath can roll up underneath that, or you can have them register independently. This is what's required. I should have put some animation on this. You've already read the slide probably, but in the US, you have to include business name, the legal business name, not just like your operating business name, the same one that matches to your EIN registration with the IRS, not your DBA. You also need to make sure if you're in Canada, there are a couple of different forms you can use, a different registration, but we're talking about US here. Just check your CP 575 or whatever that form is you use to register with the IRS. Make sure you're using the right name and the right number, because they automatically check that. If you put it in wrong, you misspell it or use a DBA, they'll reject your application. They'll make you pay again to reapply. It's really kind of a racket. The reason I bring this up is I want to protect you guys from unnecessary fees and also unnecessary interruption of business. Canadian customers, you just have to match the info on your tax identification number when you register. And then all customers have to make sure that you have, This is a little bit minutia, but like you have to just put in the +1 code for the US. But this is all managed on the back of our system. If you're one of our clients, you don't have to worry about it. We'll take care of it with you. But if you're registering your own numbers, there's also in other systems, there are all sorts of other requirements and hoops you got to jump through. We're an old dog in this industry in texting. We've been doing it for a decade, so we've got a much more streamlined flow. Your website, we got to talk about this because we've talked about opt-in statements, but I want to talk about the second part down here, privacy policies. Your privacy policy has to be compliant. I mentioned this before, but you have to make sure that you clearly are stating that you're not going to share their mobile number or their personal information with anybody without their permission for marketing, for promotional, third party. And then again, you have to remind them in the privacy policy how they opt out of texting. Those things, if they're present in your privacy policy, you'll be fine. If they're absent or you say that you'll sell their information, you'll get rejected and you won't text. And also, just because you've been approved in the past and you're texting today, if these things are out of alignment, we've seen a few instances where the regulatory body does random spot checks and then they shut off texting. They stop delivering texting for you. How fun is that, right? So let's talk about a few things. We talked about the registration process. We talked about your website requirements. If you're working with us, you're working with another group. A lot of people use Twilio. It's one of the biggest and best telephony providers for backend texting. Then they will approve something and let you pick a number. But then there's this last step, and this is what I want to talk about, the TCR, the Campaign Registry Group. We'll talk more about them in a moment. They're a fascinating and clandestine group. But after you've been approved by the telephony registration, then they have to go through and verify your campaign. They'll do a couple more checks to make sure you actually are legit. It could take us several days for them to do it. I don't know why. We're talking about mostly automated processes, and I've seen some really dumb mistakes here. But this is important that you guys understand. This is another step after you've done everything that you need to do with us or whoever else you're using for a texting provider. Then the campaign registry has to give you a rubber stamp. Then the cell phone companies will allow you to text their members, their clients. Since we've been talking about the TCR, let's talk about this group, the Campaign Registry. I did a little research a while ago because we've been in the middle of this mess with them trying to deal with their new regulatory things. Let's call them regulatory. At first, it was let's talk about who they are. Their goal is to control texting and generate revenue. No one talks about the second part, but they are generating hundreds of millions of dollars a year of, how many people have a cell phone line from a business that are texting? $10 a month, every single one of those. And $44, $25, $69 per entity to register that number for the privilege of texting to their customers. This is their purpose. And don't get confused by that. It was all done under the guise of let's protect the consumers. We didn't need to generate hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue for the mobile companies through this new entity, the TCR, in order to protect consumers. But I'll stop pontificating about that. Let's talk. So it's a ghost agency. They created what's called a trust score. If you ever watched the Black Mirror or you've heard about some of the things happening in China with the social scores, it's a little bit like that actually. So, but there are a few things that they apply to your trust score. The trust score, the lower the number, the more they ratchet down your deliverability through their networks, especially T-Mobile. They're the kind of the worst at this. They're leading the way in screwing up business texting. So the trust score, though, is going to reduce the amount of volume of texting that you can push out into those ecosystems. You have a low trust score, you're in trouble. This all depends upon so your approval initially depends upon following those things we've talked about: the compliance on the website, opt-in statements, using proper opt-out statements with your texting, etc. Accurate EIN business information. If that's not right, you just won't get approved. So you don't even have to worry about them ratcheting down your trust score. The age of business. This is an issue. So a lot of the brands that we work with, or even consultant networks that we work with, consultants are new business entities. Excuse me, I've seen them get hammered by this. If you are, and I'll share one example, I don't think they'll mind. Well, actually, I won't share specifics. One of the brands we work with got acquired by a massive platform company a couple of years ago. And they've been a client of ours, though, for years before that. It's one of the reasons they got acquired, actually, is they were performing super well in their sales. So they had to create, when they got acquired, excuse me, a new business entity, a new EIN. And so when they did, that made their company age appear to be like 18 months. Well, they have 125 operating franchises that were all registered and texting. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, the TCR, the Campaign Registry Group, did an audit. And they said, you're only an 18-month-old business. We're going to change your trust score from, I think it was 64 down to a 16. And what that meant was now they could only deliver 2,000 text messages a day to the T-Mobile network. Well, if you're a small business, even a moderate sized FSO, like who cares? You know, they only make up 20-25% of the US economy of texting. So it's equivalent of saying, hey, you can only send out 8,000 texts a day. That's a lot. When you've got 125 operating businesses with a high volume business model, they got screwed by this pretty bad. So they actually had people where at certain points of the day, the text just stopped going out because the TCR was blocking it with their trust score. So just be aware, if you're registering for your phone number, your cell phone, let's say you registered the franchise development entity of your franchise system last month, use your franchise system EIN. This is just a tip. And that because it's going to have an older EIN, age of business is going to show up well. They're not going to throttle your trust score down to like a 16. Talked about this, but be aware. And if there are things that you're doing, if you guys are misbehaving or you got a franchisee that's misbehaving in your ecosystem, they're sending out 50,000 text messages a month to who knows whom, and who knows if they've got any opt-ins whatsoever. There's a high volume of opt-outs because they're sending crap messaging. This can affect your overall trust score if you've registered your brand and all your operating units or all of your operating franchise brands are under one umbrella. So there's a plus side to that. It's easy, it's less expensive. There's the downside that just make sure your people are using texting appropriately. Set up some guardrails, set up some automated things that can be controlled so they're using good messaging. So let's talk about my favorite part about this group is there's no way to contact them. There's no way to get support. You have to work through like an organization like us. We have to work through Twilio. They have a contact over there. But if you have a problem with what they're doing with you, you've got no recourse and no way to get support, no way to fix the problem, even if they screw up, which they have multiple times with our clients. So anyway, but we get them fixed. We go to bat. But just be aware, this is a ghost organization. They have an office that is in like Reston, Virginia, in a Kiln share office with 28 other organizations, no phone number, PO box only. You get the idea. They have no interest in actually providing support. They just want to take your money. And if you don't pay them, they'll shut you down. So anyway, it's all required. Good stuff. I'm being negative. Sorry, I'll keep moving on. Let's talk about now. I mentioned I'd come back to this. So we do lead response audits for the industry, just on our own, independent of all the cool things that are happening with FranData and things. FLDC you'll see next week. We do it on our own, and we actually check to see how many websites are TCPA compliant with their opt-in statements. Right now, almost 60% of the industry, the franchise industry, as far as what we've checked, is not compliant with those opt-in messages. Some of them even have basic by submitting opt-ins, but they don't cover the 4 main check boxes, so they're not compliant and they're at risk of having their texting ratcheted down or even texting not delivered because they're not compliant with that. So not a doom and gloom, but just FYI, like you really need to make sure you guys are paying attention to those opt-in statements for both the consumer side and also the frandev side. A lot of times the frandev websites almost feel like an afterthought. Be careful about that. Double check both after you're done. We've already shown you how to look for it, what to look for. Spend some time after this to please check. I have to say something about this only because, well, you just need to be aware. If you have chosen to operate in California, and I know so many brands that refuse to, but if you do, you have to make sure you are aware of what CCPA compliance is. And other states are starting to create their own kind of ideas of what they're adding a few layers of complexity onto compliance around texting or consumers requesting deletion of their contact records. This is a violation. Like it's in violation of the TCPA regulations, where you're supposed to keep records of your communications with and contacts for, I think it's 4 or 5 years. CCPA says, if a consumer says delete my contact out of your system, then you're supposed to go do it. Well, now you have to ask, like, which one do you want to govern? I'll let you work that out with your attorneys, but just so you're aware of what it means. It's really this is the key thing. Just delete the records when you have the request for them, and then you're going to be pretty compliant. Follow TCPA regulations, opt in, opt out. Protect the consumer's rights to not have you communicate with them. If you're following those general guidelines, you're going to be fine. Now let's talk about some of the new things that are coming. They are just a little scary. just a little bit. And I don't want to terrify you or anything. I just want you to be aware so you can be educated. Because if you know what's coming, you can take action and be aware of it. But January 25 is when these regulations are supposed to go live. So let's talk about some of them. FCC is going back and kind of reinterpreting things in the TCPA and other regulations to say, we want to close some loopholes. You guys are familiar with a lot of the lead gen services. If your home service is Angie, Thumbtack, Networks, Modernize, whatever. If you're on the frandev side, you're talking about Biz Buy Sell and Franchise Gator, Franchise Help, all the lead gen portals, right? They all have a similar process. Some of them are slightly different. Some of them will get mad that I say this, and I'm not trying to be disparaging, but they'll have kind of clandestine opt-ins for other lead options, right? So if I go to one of these web pages, let's say I'm looking for a franchise. I won't name names. I go to their web page and I say, I'm looking at let's say Color World. That's just on there. They're showing you their site. I'm on the Color World painting listing on this portal website. And I say, I'd like to know more. Below the screen, sometimes it's on screen so it can be seen, but often that person, me, the consumer, I want to hear information about Color World, but off screen or somewhere else, it's showing that I've opted in to also hear information about line painting and Painter One and Serve Pro and like whoever else, right? Got You Covered, whoever. And sometimes they're not even related brands. They're just like filling out the check boxes, unbeknownst to the consumer. The consumer puts in the information and submits it. And now 5 people are calling them, some of which are calling them about brands that aren't related to the brand they were inquiring about. If you've ever been on the receiving end of one of those leads and you call them and they're like, why are you calling me? It's because they've already been called by 4 other people and they're frustrated and they're like, I just wanted to know about Color World, right? So they're confused. So this is the regulatory change. And I don't think it's terrible, but it is going to have a real impact on the industries. So it's a 1-to-1 consent. You've already read the slide. All that it means is anyone who's generating a lead, and I'm going to pause here, franchisors that are platform companies that are doing lead gen for multiple brands, you're included in this. FSOs that are doing lead gen for multiple brands, you're included in this. Portals, you're all included in this. You're being targeted by this. So what it really says is if I go to that website, Dave, the consumer, and I say, hey, I'm interested in that Color World franchise, they need to present me with options that are visible and very clear. And let's say, well, would you like to hear about Painter One? And it's an unchecked box. I have to check the box. Yep, I want to hear about Painter One. Do you want to hear about line painting? No, I don't. Actually, I do. Do you want to hear about this other painting brand? No, I don't. Right? So I have to personally check and opt into those boxes. If I do not, it's not legal anymore as of January 1 to be selling that contact information to a Painter One lead, someone who's buying that lead, or to a line painting, or to a Klappenberg, or to a whoever, right? T-Berry. You can't do it anymore. That's what this is all about. What does it mean, though? What's the impact? The impact is that you're going to have the portals are going to drop in volumes because they've been relying upon this kind of multi-opt-in option that is no longer going to be allowed. They're going to have to put it in front of the consumer, and that's going to naturally just reduce the number of leads that come through. Not because they're doing anything bad or worse, just the nature of the mechanics are going to change. So what does that mean for you guys? Make sure that you're diversifying. We'll talk about that in a minute. Diversify your lead spend, diversify your channels, work on getting your own private channels, do things that will generate leads organically and through social and through other things. I've heard a lot of people recently talking about how X or Twitter is helping them generate leads. Take a look. Don't be afraid of dipping your feet into these other platforms. All right, let's get back to this. Sorry, my screen share just stopped, guys. 1 second. All right, give me 1 sec. We're going to talk about a couple more of these things, and I'm going to speed up the pace because I feel like maybe I'm belaboring the point here. Give me 1 second. All right. Not sure why that stopped. Hopefully you guys can see the slides again. So let's talk about the next aspect here. The texting and do not call registry. The FCC in their comments said, well, we never did intend for a consumer opt-out to only be text. If they opt out of texting, they also should be opting out of calling. Never once had anything to do with it, but that's kind of the change that's coming. So they want to tie do not call registry and SMS opt-out to the same event. So be aware. They're going to want to make sure that if somebody opts out of texting, that now you're no longer calling them. So you're going to need to have a way to flag that. That's something that we've been developing for months as we saw this coming. But you have to be aware of that, and also make sure if they do opt out of texting that you also don't call them. And if they're on the do not call registry, they're also saying they inversely want to say, well, if they're on the do not call registry, you shouldn't text them. Well, that's pretty hard to manage, right? And I mean, so those are other things that, again, we and hopefully other technology providers you might work with are trying to think ahead of how do you tie that all into the system that you're working with your contacts. That's something that's on our roadmap right now that's being developed. But that's tricky to manage. We'll talk about how you supersede that in a minute, but just want you to be aware that dual opt-out function is a little bit obnoxious, and that's a new change. You're gonna have to manage it properly. Then this is, I'm curious how this is going to work. They refer to the Enforcement Bureau. I think they're talking about the TCR, but they don't name them there. They're trying to say that they're going to start forcing the mobile providers to block texts from numbers that they decide aren't worthy to text their people anymore. So you get, maybe they're getting too many opt-outs. They're really ambiguous about what this means, but this one's a little bit not fear-mongering. Just want you to be aware, like some other things might change here, and we don't know what they are yet. They're laying the foundation unless this gets repealed soon. Let's hope. Careful who you vote for this year, but unless it gets repealed, there might be additional ways and mechanisms that the mobile providers are going to just start blocking text messages because they decide that they want to drop your trust score, for example. You might not know why, and all of a sudden your text stopped getting delivered. So this one is a little squishy. I don't know how fast they'll be able to deploy it, but just want to keep you aware that this is also something that they're promoting. Which is all being managed by this Enforcement Bureau, which I think is the TCR. And and they also say they're going to, this is almost their language. They're like, we're going to ask them to step up blocking measures. I don't know what that means. But as we get more information, we'll let you know. Now, let's talk about opt-ins. So we talked about why it's important to do an opt-in, but here's another reason why it's important to make sure you've got good opt-ins and that you're asking consumers to opt in. Whenever you're starting to engage from them, make sure your lead providers are getting proper opt-ins from any portals you buy from. There's a new portal that reaches out and says, hey, we can help you get leads. One of the first questions you need to ask is, what's your opt-in? I need to make sure these leads coming through, I have express permission to communicate with. But the other value of an opt-in is it overwrites or supersedes a do not call registry. It overwrites and supersedes. If they've been a lead of yours before and they fill out a form and say, hey, I want to hear more information from you, you have now the permission to communicate with them again through text and through call and through email. But again, you have to be compliant and give them the option to opt out again. If they opt out again, there you are back at that same place where you can't text them. But if they fill out a form and say, hey, I actually want to talk to you again, you have now the permission to talk to them. There's one other thing here, and it feels squishy, but it's called a business relationship. So if you have a client that is paying you money, or that you're going to go provide service to, or that's in your funnel and you're working them through the process of acquiring a franchise, being awarded a franchise, you have what's called a business relationship. That does have a little bit of a time span connected to it, but the FCC seems like they're trying to get a little more clarity around what that means. But if you have a business relationship with someone, you have their transactional and their marketing emails and text messages. You need to start to be able to delineate between what's a transactional, what's a marketing, or just a conversational text message with a consumer. If a consumer texts you, hey, Dave, how's it going? I can 100% respond back. That doesn't give me the right to start marketing to them again. If a consumer has said, hey, I don't want any more messages about your spam, or please stop sending me stuff about your promotional. This is kind of adding diversification and complexity in the texting world, but you're going to have to start managing that opt-out differently than a transactional opt-out, which is tricky because right now opt-outs are pretty absolute in texting across the board. So anyway, those are some things that are coming, but bear in mind your transactional communication, you're always okay to call a customer and talk to them if they're paying you money, or you're supposed to show up and do an on-site visit or whatever. That's part of being in a business relationship. Somebody gives you a business card at the conference and says, yeah, get in touch with me. You have the right to contact them, but make sure your first text is always including that opt-out message. Even though it feels unnatural and unprofessional, if you think it feels that way, who cares what you think? That's the rule, so follow that rule, please. All right, let's move on. So let's talk about, so what? What do you do, right? You still have to get the most out of your lead gen spend. So don't stop texting, right? Don't stop using these tools. Don't stop calling people. Don't rely upon email drips because 1985 called. It's not going to work real well. It's still not the best way. Speed to lead still will matter. That doesn't change because regulations change. So make sure that you're the one that's getting to that lead first in a meaningful way. Email, text, phone calls. Those are the channels that you need to engage with. Make sure you've got outreach diversity. You need to continue to engage across those channels. If you're on a social platform, engaging in the social platform, actually staying in platform, increases engagement a lot. but don't stop engaging across all mediums or media, because we found that if you text first and then call 2 minutes later, you have a 40% increase in answer rates. Like there's synergy across the media as well. If you have an important email, send a text, let people know you sent them, then your open rates will go up by 2-3x, right? Like use them properly, but also follow the rules, right? There is a lot of fear about engaging dead leads, right? Like, oh, well, when can I re-engage? How can I re-engage? A couple of things I want to share. One, there is a lot of value in doing it. This is a pilot we did with a group in frandev, and they didn't believe me. They said, dead leads are dead leads. And I said, false. They're Lazarus leads. They come back to life. And they said, whatever, Dave. And I said, let's do a pilot with your account, and we'll put a group of leads that were at least 6 months dead into a campaign. Let's turn it on. Let's re-engage them. Well, we did it, and these were the results. They were better results. Their close rate was 2.6% on dead leads from initial engagement to a signed deal. But this is 60 days later. They'd already closed that deal. 60 days later, they had 10% of their leads in an FDD review. They had sent the FDD to 8% of their leads. They had an application sent to 2. You guys see the numbers, right? This is incredible behavior, and these are 6 months or older dead leads that were in this pilot that we did. So again, no such thing as a dead lead. Call them Lazarus leads, re-engage them. But let's talk about that business relationship. If it's been over 18 months since you've engaged with them at all, if you choose to text them, you have to send them an opt-out statement. A lot of people would recommend call and email only after 18 months. If they were a lead that was unresponsive, for example, you're treading some pretty thin ice if you're going to start texting them a lot. Right. So be judicious. Mostly emails with these people if they've been dead for a while, but an email with a text and a clear opt out on that first text. And then, a general nurture campaign is going to be a really good way to engage. However, if they're 5-year-old leads, 10-year-old leads, like you shouldn't be texting those people. If you do, the first message needs to be, hey, is this still Steve? Just want to make sure it's okay for me to text you. It's Dave from. Like, you should be very cautious with your language and put the opt-out in front of them early and make sure it's still the right person. There are some regulatory things changing where they want to, the FCC wants businesses to go check like a phone number change database to see if somebody's phone number has changed, R&D. That's not required yet. So we're not talking about it today, but it's another layer of complexity that they want to add on top of this. It says businesses, you're responsible now to, before you text somebody or call them, you got to go check this database to see if they're on the do not call list and go see if they've had their phone number changed recently. That's craziness, but we're not going to talk about it today because it's not required. But just be cautious as you're re-engaging old leads. Lean heavily on email. Use video in your email because it'll make it more effective. Let's also talk about diversifying your lead gen channels, right? As we see this one-to-one rule take effect, and lead volumes through portals will generally decline. I think they'll bounce back a little, but they're never going to be where they were. They just can't. Just the mechanics are different enough. But you got to take a look at how you want to diversify your lead spend. You need to look at, if you're in franchise development, I forgot to I was going to throw Angie and Thumbtack and Networks and a bunch of, and Connects Pros on here for the home service guys as well. If you're in, a Place for Mom, if you're in the elderly care space, right? Like, there are a bunch of portals that are generating leads too, but you also need to get creative about your listings and your organic and your other channels that you're generating leads through. You need to be working a little bit more on your own website, build your own private channel. No one can take that away from you. The FCC can't change the flow there. Google has with their Gemini and AI stuff, which is obnoxious, but still continue to invest in that. Get your website's AI ready. So you'll start getting more flow back into you. Now, a couple of other things. You need to pay attention to what's happening, right? Because as regulations change and your lead volumes are changing and you're shifting up your lead patterns and where you're getting things from, you need to be more diligent at how you measure. You need to be checking out your lead attribution process. You need to see what your data flow looks like as data is moving through your sales funnel. Is my sales funnel declining? Is my lead quality going up? My conversion rates are increasing while the volumes are going down? Like, you need to be watching what's happening coming January, and you need to have benchmarking now for the next couple of months, and even through this year if you have historic data, so you can do year-over-year comparisons to see how you're performing. Don't be shocked if lead volumes dip, but your sales don't have to dip if the lead volumes dip if you're getting higher quality leads and you're diversifying. You also need, this is the type of data you got to look at, is what is my channel performance? Which lead channels are performing best? How many people are getting into a quote and a close and a job booked? How many people are getting into a disclosure, a confidential questionnaire, and a discover day? And you need to be able to see that data by lead channel. analyze it, pay attention to it, benchmark it now, so that next year as things shake up a little bit, if you're relying upon portals, you have a way to measure how effective those are. Couple of thoughts as I wrap up, and then we'll do some Q&A. If you don't know who Kevin Harrington is, original Shark Tank, he's a stud, a really bright guy. I was at a conference with him. He presented right before me, and he said this. He said, the secret to my success is I am willing to fail trying new things, and he fails faster than everyone else. So he iterates faster than everybody else. And it just stuck with me that it's like the Fail Fast book, Malcolm Gladwell. I think that's who wrote that. You need to be willing to iterate now. And it's not about who guesses right the best. It's about who tries something, measures it, and improves it, and tries something and measures it and improves it faster. You're going to have to iterate a little faster as things are changing in the next 12 months. There are a lot of things changing right now in the economy, the global economy, the U.S. economy. Like, there are a lot of things shifting. It's usually really good for franchising. It's been really tough on our home service clients as lead volumes dip 25 to 40% across their industries, right? But the economy should start it'll come back. It always does, but we've got to make sure that we're iterating faster as some of these things change quickly in January, so you can pivot around it and keep things on track. And it's also budget season and goal setting season. Be cautious about how you set your goals next year. I'm just trying to warn you. It won't be a crazy growth year for a lot of people, I don't think. So just be aware of that. And also, don't stop. A lot of people put their head in the sand, like, oh, things are changing, Dave, I'm afraid. What do I do? And they slow down. In order to gain market share and to grow when things get tough, you don't have to go faster. You don't have to spend more. You just have to not spend less, right? You have to maintain your pace on a race. When you are in a, I don't run much. I haven't run for years, but the hills is where you pass people. Crazy runners love hills because they're like, that's where I'm going to get ahead of these 5 people in front of me, right? Again, don't increase your pace, just maintain. And you'll be in good shape when things come around to next year and these changes start to take effect. Sure appreciate you guys joining me here today. If you have questions about this, you want to dive deeper, you can reach out to our team, sales@clientether.com. There's our phone number to call us directly. You can reach out to me directly if you like as well. Reach us on LinkedIn. We'll be at FLDC next week. Like, we're all over the place. So we're easy to access, but feel free to access us and ask us for that. Or if you want access to our Speed to Lead playbook, again, reach out. We're happy to help. Go to our website. You can learn more. And we've got all sorts of resources and tools. And a lot of this stuff in the slide deck is cauterized into documents we give our clients. If you want them, I don't care if you're a client, we'll give them to you because we want to protect our friends in franchising from some of the regulatory changes.